So welcome to the much anticipated book launch of The Promise of Justice. I think we've all known it's been in the works for a very long time. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces, a lot of new faces, and I'm sure you've all been a big part of getting this book on the road. So to do the VIP welcome, as I can remember, my dad's been writing this book. And for most of you will know that every funny story or anecdote or event that happens, he wants to put it in the book. Every day I found something funny from Varsity. Oh, that's going in my book. So here it is, finally, I don't know, 10 years later. But he really has invested his heart and soul into this book. I mean, he really cares about it deeply. Alright, anyway, as I said, he's really invested a lot into this book, and it's so nice to be finally, in physical copy. And I've actually had to measure copy editing a lot of my dad's writing, so I can say firsthand he's very good at writing. He's extensive, as you'll probably know. But, I've had the pleasure of really understanding that he has a lot of thoughts and they do string together eventually. But hopefully you'll find something you can relate to in this book, something that speaks to you, which you probably can because most of you are in the book anyway. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Princess Sigcau.
I'd like to express my gratitude to John, and I was listening to her daughter, waiting for an opportunity for her to say something about the many trips that John has taken to Pondoland and complaining about being left alone during that time, but I'm glad I didn't hear that. But I think I am as emotional as I was, John, after the Constitutional Court ruling last year. But at the same time, I'm filled with gratitude and would like to express our sincere appreciation and thanks to you for putting my brother's life in context in the way that you have done in this series. At least we know that his life was not in vain. Looking forward to the third part of the series. And thank you very much. And thank you for everyone who has come to grace this occasion. Because as much as it is John's book, it is our book as well, because it is my brother's life that is being exposed in a way that it has not been before. And I do have Amambondo Akoyo Apa, and I also do have my brother's son Ubulalani over there that I would like to introduce. And as John said, unfortunately Wezizwe couldn't make it. With those few words, thank you very much.
Denis Beckett, who will hopefully do some grilling and really get to the heart of what this is really about and what my dad has to say about it. So take it away.
First of all, I want to say this much. And I greet, may I greet Amakosi? Do I say, Dilizintaba?
Dilizintaba. Sukana umtimbuke kwazi umthutha kodwa waba zindlovu inkosi yapha engqongqo kodwa amanyawuza zoqala ndibonge ezi zaseQaukeni kuba usuka inkosazana kaloku lo this book ngokasichama kundleni kuvelela utshula kumkani uBola Sigcau unyana wakhe lo ubhalwe apho kodwa ke ubhale wena incwadi andithi mandiyime apho.
So watch out for word inflation. Now I want to tell you, I protect words. I love words, I respect words. I believe in vulnerable words, I protect them. And I protect the word marvelous, particularly. And that's because of a particular experience that applied to me. One day, some time ago, here in the Zule, that side, I was on an early morning walk and I was walking through the bit of the little separate lakes, the little mini lakes over on the Jansmat side, which are sort of hidden by trees. And as I walked through one, I found a guy having his morning bath in the lake. And this guy was like knee deep in the lake, gloriously naked, soaping himself. And he was a bit surprised, and I was probably slightly more surprised. And he called out, hello. So I said, hello. He said, how are you? So I said, fine. I said, how are you? And he says, Mamalos! beg your pardon, he says, I'm marvelous! And I think, is he saying, I'm motherless? But he didn't look motherless. In fact, he looked far from motherless. And I realized he was saying, I'm marvelous! And I thought, isn't that nice? I thought, all around me there's people with nice houses and nice beds and spacious bedrooms. And if I say, how are you? They don't tell me, I'm marvelous! They say, fine, well, okay, could be worse. Something like that. And I really kind of love this guy with his marvelous. So I want to protect the word marvelous. So I'm not using the word marvelous all over the place and flashing it around. Now I come to the point. There's a marvelous thing that this guy is doing. The marvelous thing is this. The marvelous thing is happening right here, right now. This guy is one of the very few people in the world who would ever be prepared to line up somebody who disagrees with him on almost everything that he's written about to introduce his book. It's genuinely marvelous. I once had Van Zijlstra criticizing a book that I'd done. He was launching my book and he criticized it. And it was an unexpected criticism. I didn't know it was coming at all. And well, it took 5 years before we were on proper speaking terms. Where John knows, he knows. I mean, I've argued with him almost everything that he writes about. I'm disagreeing with him all over the place. His big passions, I think most people have detected these passions, but his big passions are to protect pondos and pondo land from wicked mining, tearing up their beaches, and wicked roads, tearing strips through glorious open countries. That's his one lot of big passions. His other big passion is protecting the world in general from e-tolls. He's got a partner here, the partners in crime, protecting the world from e-tolls and from Sanral. Now, I don't agree with him on any of this. And he invites me to come and watch his book. I really make a genuine point here. I think there's something very good about this. It's because, well, John in his head is already living in the better world that we should be, could be, and ought to be coming to. One feature of that world will surely be a much higher recognition of getting on without agreeing. Today's norm is that if I'm in the blue party and you are in the green party, we will see each other through hooded lids, and at a distance, and with a cautious expression. And we will talk only about the weather and the rugby. One day we're going to look back and we're going to say that the way of life that we live now is a primitive way of life. It's unnecessarily aggressive. What's the word that I'm looking for? Mutually aggressive? Antagonistic, that's it. Adversarial. Antagonistic is fine. We'll live with antagonistic. All of us are protectable words. But one day we're going to think, together, you don't have to be agreeing with people to get on with people. Now, 100 years ago, an American sports writer named Grantland Rice wrote a sentence. It matters not whether you won or lost, it's how you play the game. Now, I don't know how often and how fully anywhere that sentence has been actually imbibed. You hear it quoted quite a lot, yes, but how many people actually live that way? I don't know. I also know that that sentence has limits. If the World Cup final score is Wallabies 22, Springboks 21, don't come and tell me, no, it doesn't matter, it's just about how you play the game. I'm not going to listen to you. In fact, I'll probably be a little bit antagonistic. And now, in a way, what John is getting to is, well, there is something in that way of thinking. There is something real, there is something important in the line of thought that that phrase is addressing. There's realness in the capacity to learn a little, to bend a little, to adjust a little in acknowledgement of other views. There is realness in sticking to what you want, while at the same time being prepared to get there bit by partial bit, because I don't want it. That's progress. And John is expressing that progress here now at this event. We're going to come to a time that we consider it obvious that there's nothing disagreeable about disagreement. We don't consider it obvious now. You're in a way leading the way to a better place, say Clarke Esquire, and I'm going to be impressed. And it's a small way that you're leading it, and hey, but you're a real pioneer, man. You're before your time. So what I want to say is moist word, marvelous. Okay. Then I want to turn to slightly simpler things. I want to turn to delightful things. There are a few of these, but they are brief. I want to say one delightful thing about John's book is is glorious freedom. Freeness with random information.
Thank you.
Pick up a book about justice and Fonderland and mining. You don't expect to come away with the figure in your head that the total quantity of coastal kilometers on this planet is 782,724 kilometers. You don't expect that, frankly. You don't expect to come away with an essay on the distinction between archetype and stereotype. Bonus! So, bonus. For one thing, I like John's fine line in irony. He is constantly recognizing the ironies of his own position, such as, for example, defending a hereditary monarch against an elected president. It's very ironic. And typically, John, he covers this in a chapter called Behind the Irony Curtain. For one thing, is interweaving of these two major episodes of governmental bullying. This is smart in its own right. His relationship of two Bondo kings to two South African political heads. Nearly 100 years apart, the parallels, the similarities, the crisscrossings of the web. And then into this, he liberally draws in philosophy, traditional law, ethics, and a whole lot more. I like that, John. For one thing, his affection. His affection hangs out all over the place. His affection for the place he is in and the people who belong to it. Even in the times that he's thinking he's being the hard, detached reporter, objective, you see this affection like hanging out. He doesn't even realize that his gentle nature and his benign intentions are painted all over his page. That's delightful. And then I want to say that there's another thing. Wholesome, the word wholesome keeps coming up. This is a wholesome book. I've just, by the way, read, I'll funnily enough give you an unexpected plug for a completely different book. My wife persuaded me to read a book called The Tool Assassin, which purports to be a history of Hendrik van den Berg, the one-time head of the security police, of Euro State Security. Well, it's riveting. But you can't really believe it, you don't know what to believe. But the important thing, to my mind, is that that book is about deceit, filth, humanity at its bottom, from the first page to the last. John's book is just like a total counterpoint. It's like a wholesome book. It's a wholesome guy with wholesome beliefs, doing his wholesome best to uphold them, and dealing with, there's no deviousness, there's no cloak and dagger, and it's kind of heartening. It's heartening to see that the world has a capacity to be this open, this honest. Then, second last thing is John's absolutely consistent self-deprecation. Very light-hearted way, self-deprecating. And there's lots of these that I love, but the one that I liked that to me was magnificent is, fortunately, my own superstitions are strictly confined to the Roman Catholic brand. And here we go. And then the very last thing, this is my favorite thing, it's where John plays exuberant wild games with words. That's what words are for. Words are not to be stuck in a dictionary and rule over everybody. Words are to be used as intelligent minds find uses for them. Well, John's applied the intelligent mind, and he's found a hell of a lot of uses of words. I told you about the irony curtain. I want to tell you that, the Pondo uprising of 1950, what? 8, 7, something, 50s, 1950s? 61. John takes the Pondo uprising, 61, I was close enough. John creates this new term for the new sense of rebellion against the mining and the roads. And it's the Pondo uprising. As in, wise up. Wise up. Wise up in this process of rebelling. You don't necessarily get shot, hopefully. There's a people's protest where posters turn titanium into unobtainium. And I'm going to bet, this is a poster, there's a poster in the book, and I bet that John Clarke was not a hell of a long way from where that phrase was invented. And when I read of the FIFA World Cup as the weapon of mass destruction, I see John. Mass distraction. Mass distraction, I didn't say it. Weapon of mass distraction, I see it, thank you. And finally, when there's the word, the process of constant backing and forthing of lawsuits is blessed with the term lawfare. I think for 400 years we've perceived Shakespeare as the prime architect of new terms in the English dictionary. Shakespeare better watch out, because this man is still at work here. He's got places to go. John's book is plea for wisdom and a foundation for thought. It is a championing of integrity and of altruism. It is a work to be proud of. Thank you, John.
John plays with words with a Catholic undertone and with such precision and a sense of irony in many ways. So as I was rushing here, I said, such a complex, convoluted, and yet entertaining book. How do you peel all the onion layers that John is trying to extract? The first thing that was an amazing observation was to draw two moments in the Pondo history where you have encounters between the Pondo kingdom and the government. One under Cecil John Rhodes. Different historical moment, but it's a power play between tradition and authority. And how even the iconic colonial master Cecil John Rhodes gets humbled in the challenge of Sigcau. That comes out in this book. But then he takes a leap to look at the current battles between King Pondo Sigcau and the post-apartheid democratic government. The one thing you draw is that even under the democratic government, the notion of traditional leadership has not been given the space that it ought to have been given. Even in the Constitution, I'm happy that Ngosi Patekile Holomisa, I'm not sure whether today he's in as a deputy minister or as, the royal leader.
Yes, myself.
That even in the Constitution, the shortest chapter 12 is about traditional leadership. It says very little. In this current conflict, one thing that I observed, which many people often do not raise, and it's raised in this book, is that traditional communities and traditional leaders that we often do not associate with the modern struggles in protecting their environment. Our notion of the people who are activists in that space is usually the tree-hugging activists with a knapsack on their back and many pins, shouting this and that slogan, hardly suspecting that traditional communities have the same sense about ecological issues, about environment. So that is one lesson that comes out of this book. The other one, which I think is most interesting and it's current, it's when he then draws the issue of Sanral, the toll road, of course, that very notorious person in the book, Nazir Ali. When he draws that into the power play and the outcomes of the Clarke Commission, that's another very nuanced observation that John brought in, which many of us would have seen this struggle as a separate struggle, another struggle as a separate struggle. But another thing that I extracted from the book was how complex our history is, that John could trace his heritage through Pondoland. Not in Europe, even though some descendants might have come from Europe. And in the search of his roots, in an unlikely place like Pondoland, he come to be part of the community. And as a social worker, he becomes an activist. He becomes part of the story. And sometimes you almost can say he's acculturated. You know the case of an ethnographer who go to study the community and ultimately is socialized and begin to internalize some of the issues of the community and may even begin to be an activist on their behalf. I think my reading of the book revealed that part. The style of writing suggests a person who has read extensively from Catechism on a Sunday and the Bible, because the parables, the use of language is rich, is dense, but you can tell the influence of religion. I'm sure you won't deny that part. Actually, it comes again and again. And one thing that is most interesting, of course, I was fascinated when he gave me the draft, The Promise of Justice. He had just extracted the name of King Mbondobini, Justice Sigcau, and he turned that into a title of a book. There are times when we write and you do not know what to put as the title of your book, which is catchy. But because John's mind works as a Smithsonian or an encyclopedia that is walking, he coined terms. That's why you said Shakespeare should watch out. And now at least he has no competition because he's 500 plus years away. John doesn't have much. It's the likes of Ali Mazrui that I know to have coined terms each time he writes, or Samuel Huntington. So that in itself might just be a calling of John away from being a social worker into being an academic. And I don't know what, would that be, and I know he's working on a number of projects. The other thing that I wanted to raise is that the book reveals, though you still have some space to reflect on that, the complexity of traditional rulership. I'm writing some journal article on just one thing, the uncoded succession processes in traditional leadership, which is what has confused even investigators in the Clarke Commission. When Sigcau, who was the king of the Pondus, died, the very complex situation in terms of succession emerges. Just saying, this is a very entertaining and yet very rich historical book that will certainly generate a lot of debate. Credit to John, especially the work he has done in such a short space of time. Because when I saw the first manuscript you heard during the funeral, I doubted that by this time you would have something this big and this rich. Thank you.
As any good social worker, say, look, it wasn't me, it was you, because social workers get the blame when things go wrong, but when things go right, it's supposed to be. And I have to say, it really is the case. It's not so much my abilities as my disabilities. You'll see that those of you who have got an inscription on the book so far, that it's virtually illegible. When I was at school, the poor nuns who had to try to educate said, look, you're going to have to do something. They put me under instruction to try and print, and that appalling handwriting. When I got to university, one of my professors said, I can see there's some modicum of intelligence lurking under the straw. Go and learn to type. This was in 1978, before computers and all the rest. So I went off to a sight and sound course and I banged away another into time. And now I'm a writer. So it was that inability to write. And I say that because people then say, I suppose you speak, the language, you kind of deeply embedded. I don't speak an African language. Unless you count Afrikaans, and even that's bad. And some people say I don't even speak English pretty well. The fact of the matter is that disability meant that I knew that there was something about this Pondo uprising in 1960 that the elders had in their experience and their oral traditions. And I needed to take a young woman with me who was educated and could interpret non-Shebutuma. She came along, and as I was asking her questions and she was translating, this educated young woman said, my gosh, this is who I am as I'm a Pondo. This is what and there was an extraordinarily kind of powerful platform that was created between two generations because I can't speak Pondo. So you can see it, and I'm not trying to say that, because we look to say, well, how well educated, why don't you have a PhD? There's a sense in which it's about your availability rather than your ability, and trying to say, well, I'm going to be true to myself, and I say this because I know every one of you has got a story to tell. And the same thing can apply then. There's shortly to be, a film has been made about this whole saga as well, which will be much more digestible in the book. Some of you have seen it. It's in pre-release. It will be released after the international premiere in next month. It's called The Shore Break, and it's an extraordinary piece of work by Riley Grunenwald, and you can still see the trailer. Now, even then, people say, my gosh, there's a film. She didn't use too much of my footage, but we then decided this translation was too difficult simultaneously, so I said, well, let me just film these meetings, and afterwards would listen to them and translate. Suddenly I found myself with the most extraordinary historical record, which then I was able to show to filmmakers, and then for the last 3 years, Riley has been tracking us, keeping watch on the story, filming, because my filmmaking skills are somewhat rudimentary, but there's a film made out of it. So, and I look back and I think, my gosh, how did this happen? So, yeah, and then I also have to say, well, this paradox, there's this saying at the moment, which I think Aubrey Big says, about the cultural majority and the numerical minority. And he says that South Africa's society is still dominated by what is a cultural minority, a cultural majority who are a numerical minority, educated people like ourselves. And I found myself in my engagement and relationship with young people who are a minority, kind of numerically, suddenly finding an extraordinary insight about what is going wrong with our society in the walled city of Johannesburg in terms of its relationship with power and its economic sort of logic, etc., etc. So that's partly what I think is what makes an interesting story, is to explore those paradoxes. And I'm very grateful, Denis, that you kind of draw a parallel with Shakespeare. I mean, I wish I could write like Shakespeare, by no means can I. What I found extraordinary, Shakespeare's ability to understand human nature. And my late dear friend, Jonathan Rands, and I, and I just think of Jonathan as being another friend who's passed on. We were sitting together. I said, Jonathan, why can't we write a play, or a story? And I was thinking of Hamlet and Macbeth. Why is it that the people that make history and push it ahead are the people who will, I own blood steps so far now that nothing will sort of stop me. This vaulting ambition, I will carry on and on. And my wife's kicking me behind saying, shut up. The point that I wanted to make is that I said, and the ethical people, because Macbeth, we all know, was a murderer. The ethical people are the Hamlets. To be or not to be, whether it's just know the mind stuff, etc., etc., this indecision, this kind of like inability to move. So I said, why can't we have the heroes of society, the people that are decisive, He says, John, if you can write a story that combines the hero who gets on with the job and does the right thing, he says, it will make history. So it's been a theme which I'm still struggling with, and I haven't yet resolved it, because I find myself caught up with doubts in the same way as Hamlet did, of not knowing. And so I suppose that's why when I met King Mpondombili and found myself in this extraordinary privileged position of being a social worker, helping him with his health, having had his legs amputated, discovering that this man had the most extraordinary insight of history. And he then told me about what happened with Cecil John Rhodes and his great-great-grandfather. Went out and anybody know the story? I found one historian, Cox, that he did. I tease all the lawyer friends I have. Do you know about Cecil John Rhodes versus Sigcau? No, never heard of it. It's in the book. So that's why this extraordinary sense that we have still so much in this country which we need to draw on to get us over in the next 20 years of our democracy to cross that River Jordan into what the promised land is. I'm very concerned at the moment that we're in this kind of twilight place at the moment, 20 years. Look what's happening in Parliament, National Parliament, and I get very alarmed that there is just, and I look what's happening in the executive, and I say we have to find some new direction here. So that's part, so what can you do? Just write it down, tell the story. And hopefully we will then, through this thing, find our new bearings and get a sense that when we do, in the next 20 years, find ourselves not crossing back across the Red Sea into slavery, but truly into a place where we are cherishing the environment and the land of milk and honey.